So without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to Becky Gretton, and she will introduce our amazing speaker for tonight. And thank you again and welcome.
Thank you, Susan. Good evening, everyone, and thanks once again for joining us. Rick Bunting is a very active photographer and naturalist. Since his retirement from SUNY Potsdam's Crane School of Music, he pursues these activities full-time. Countless admirers look forward daily to Rick's photos, which will likely be accompanied by combinations of humor or history, surprise or poetry, insight or reverence. As one of our board members expressed very recently, everyone loves Rick. We hardly agree. Welcome, Rick, and thanks for sharing Florida reflections with us tonight. You got your mic on?
And thank you, Becky. And my thanks also to all of the members of the Delaware Otsego group. And thanks to Susan and Charlie here for manning the fort tonight as well. It's always a joy for me to get a chance to do a program for the Delaware Otsego people, because as you can see, they are a group of very active people when it comes to our environment and interests of everything related to that. This particular program that I'm going to do for you tonight is one that I put together for the San-Cap Audubon Society, which is a group that meets on Sanibel Island down in Southwest Florida. And the idea was a chance for me to reflect on some of the many things that I have enjoyed in the 20 years or so that I've been able to spend a little time in Florida in the wintertime, specifically related to birds tonight. And the way I put it together for them was, seeing as they're housed in Sanibel, I was going to take them on a little birding trip and wind up at Sanibel, where we were actually talking with one another. So I started out in the farther reaches, and I've got to, let me see now, I'm going to turn this. I got to figure out how to do my changes now. There we are. So what I decided was that I would start a little farther away from the Fort Myers, Sanibel Island area, and begin out in the farther reaches and start with a place called the Venice Rookery. Now I just have to figure out how to change this slides here, which don't seem to be working. Did you save me, Susan? Did you share me?
Yes, your screen is sharing.
Okay. Well, for some reason, it's not moving.
I have the cover slide currently shown.
Yeah, I can't do it that way. Ah, here we go. The Venice Rookery is a place, for those of you that have been there, and I imagine some people looking at this program tonight are following right along in terms of places that they've been and things that they've seen, is a very curious little place. It has a small island in the middle of a pond, really, and it's in the middle of a park in Venice, Florida. And on this little island are multiple species of birds that come together to breed there. Every time you stand there and look at great egrets like you're looking at now, and great blue herons and anhingas and double-crested cormorants and black-crowned night herons all nesting together. It gives you hope for the human race. If the bird races can do this, maybe the rest of us can too. This was one of my favorite topics the last time actually that I was there, was following a nest of these birds, the great egrets. And here you can see mama with one of the newborns. This newborn has had time to dry out a little bit, so it has its fantastic hairdo there. They're the cutest little creatures. And at the time we were photographing this, there was a woman standing alongside me, and she said, "I think I just saw the mother throw a piece of eggshell out of the nest." And so, needless to say, I picked up the camera again and focused on it. And in fact, she was getting rid of a shell. And the reason was because this is the little newborn right here, sticking its head up with its still wet head coming out of the eggs. These are the brothers and sisters here behind, you know. And so this is one of those moments when you're taking pictures that you say to yourself, well, this is not going to happen again. You know, I should say about taking pictures, I really don't consider myself a photographer. I like to take pictures and I like to share them. And I should file my other disclaimer, which is I'm not an ornithologist, but I am interested in birds as well as a lot of other things. This little guy was probably, I might say 3 minutes old. So you're looking at a 3-minute-old great egret. There were, as I said, many other birds nesting there, such as the great blues. And all of you who know me know that great blue herons are a theme that runs through just about everything that I do. But there are anhingas as well. This is one that came up to the shore to take a look at me, or I don't know really what it was looking at, but you'll notice that this is a breeding bird. And obviously we as a human race are not the people who invented eye makeup. This is a fantastic looking bird when it's in its breeding plumage. Also gives you a little idea of how it does all that swimming around, sometimes called the snake bird, all the swimming. This is pretty good equipment right here for that kind of work. This is a pair of young anhingas, pretty gaudy looking birds, as you can see. I think that's a male on the right and a female on the left. And anhingas have a very interesting way of feeding. Those of you that are familiar with the way songbirds are fed, you know, you see a parent come in and all those little mouths go up and the parent deposits something in the mouth. And that's true of a lot of birds. Sometimes birds also just drop food for the young to, but the anhingas have a different way of going about the feeding. I don't recommend this, but this is what they do. The young actually stick their heads all the way down the throats of the birds to get their food. That's a tough way for them to get it, but it's a little tougher on the parents that are delivering, I think. We're going to go over to Herons Marsh now, which is getting closer to Sanibel Island. And this is one of the birds that everybody goes to Herons Marsh to see. This is a purple swamp hen. This is an invasive species. And it's one of those invasive species that in Florida, they tried to get rid of it with various ways of oiling eggs, et cetera, et cetera. But they realized that that simply was not going to happen. And so the bird now has become a tourist attraction. The last time I was out in the middle of the state, I I was with a large group of people, and the leader asked, "What bird did you come to see?" And about 90% said the purple swamp hen. So here it is, complete with its Florida colors, as you can see. And here's the pair, and they were at Herons Marsh. They were taking care of their little ones, who are a pretty motley looking crew, as you can see. They also had some friends around to help them. The Herons Marsh, however, is most noted for this bird, the snail kite. And when the water levels are right, these birds come in there and are still doing well. There was an invasion of an invasive species of snail, and everyone was worried what was going to happen with the snail kites, but this is one of those adaptation things in nature that actually worked out. They are feeding on the invasive species and really doing quite well there. It's a magnificent bird to see it come down out of the sky and grab one of these snails. And you can see that the bill is created just especially for getting that the meat out of there. There are lots of other birds at Herons Marsh. One that everybody is always looking for is the American bittern. And as you can see, sometimes you can look and look and look and not see an American bittern. And I put this picture in particular in because it shows the camouflage of this bird. Now, if you move that bird, 100 feet away from you, you can see the problems of finding an American bittern there. And it's even more difficult sometimes to find a least bittern because they like to hide. They like to hide in the reeds, and but they're a wonderful little bird. And we'll come back to that bird in a couple of other places. Another bird that people come to see there are the Sandhill Cranes. They do breed there. There were several nests there last year, and they've bred there almost every year that I've gone there. And here is a parent. Both the parents feed them, so I can't tell you the males and females are indistinguishable to me in this species. And you can see the parent is feeding beak to beak here, and that process really only goes on for maybe a week or 10 days. So this is a very young little chick here, sometimes called colts, but it's just easier to remember that they're little chicks. And of course, they grow up, and here's one of the parents. I believe that this was the mother, I'm not sure. And you notice the coloration of these birds, that rusty coloration is part of that is caused by the minerals in the soil that they use to take a dirt bath. And that's the way they clean themselves of parasites. And it does, in fact, tinge the coloration of their plumage.
Hey,
These two youngsters, you have a question, Charlie?
one of our listeners was wondering back a few slides ago, is the purple swamp hen the same thing as a purple galinole?
No, it is not. The purple galinole is a separate bird, and that was the bird that people were afraid was going to be eliminated because the swamp hen, of course, takes up some of its territory anyway. But it seems to be working out well. The purple galinoles are still there as well, and still in many of the other swamps in Florida. No, they're two separate birds. The purple swamp hen is also known as the gray-headed swamp hen in certain parts of Florida. The two young that we had in this slide right here started cavorting, and it was a standard youthful thing. They were chasing each other, and they chased each other all around this lot. It was a wonderful thing to watch. The mother had absolutely no control over them, as you can see. She was trying to call them down, but that did not work, So she went off by herself and let them run, and did some preening there, you know. Now we're going to move from Harns Marsh to another birding area called 6 Mile Cypress Slough. This is a kind of a miniature boardwalk. I say miniature for those of you that are familiar with Corkscrew Swamp. It's not as extensive a boardwalk, but it is the same sense of old southern Florida, huge cypress trees, and it feels like southern Florida. You're going to be greeted there by one of the preachers. There is a pair of barred owls that has nested there for several years, and they are a major attraction. I don't know whether this is the male or the female, to be honest with you. But it's a joy. They do have to, when the actual breeding starts and they get on the nest, they kind of close off the area where they are. But of course, they come out to hunt, and they come out to visit or to hold court like this one is doing. 6 Mile Cypress is my favorite place to see and watch and photograph black-crowned night herons. We're going to be talking a lot about herons and egrets, and just take a look at this heron and take a look at the color of those legs. And let's remember that most herons will have some kind of leg like this, the yellowish or greenish yellow eggs and legs, and the egrets will have blackish legs. So this is a heron, a black crowned. We're going to get to the sister a little bit later. I was watching them last year, and I had never noticed this before. They were doing a kind of hunting or fishing, where they would put the bill down in the water and agitate the bill. I do not know whether the tongue was involved as a lure, or I don't really know that, but they were agitating the water. And of course it was successful. And as you can see, this fish dinner came with a little salad on the side there. It was a very interesting thing to watch. And I thought, well, maybe that's just that particular bird. But over time, when I was there, I saw many of the black-crowned night herons doing exactly the same kind of feeding thing, although I had never seen it before last year. Another bird that has become more popular there at the 6 Mile Cypress Slough is the limpkin. And the reason for that is that this invasive snail that we were talking about before has become quite present there. And as you can see with the bill of this bird, it's also pretty well equipped to get down in there and get the snail meat. And they actually bred there. This is from 2 years ago. There were 3 chicks. One of them died, and another one was taken away by a red-shouldered hawk right in front of a pretty good crowd. And that is now known in the area as the murder at Otter Pond. You know, the natives will know what you're talking about when you talk about the murder at Otter Pond.
Rick,
As I said, there are many different kinds of birds. It's a real hot spot for incoming warblers in February and March, but also the other standard favorites like our pileateds. This gal flew in and literally flew right above my head and landed there. That's a very interesting view of a pileated. This is a female, by the way. I said she did. You'll notice that the little beard that comes down from her bill is black, and on a male that's red. Once again, my favorites, the great blue herons. And this was a very special time there about 2 or 3 years ago. A pair nested in one of the other little ponds that's there and made for some very nice close photography of my all-time favorite bird. And you'll notice that this bird is also in breeding plumage. I don't know whether I can get my cursor. See if I can get my, yeah. You'll notice that the faceplate here is turned blue. The bill becomes a more brilliant yellow, picking up all kinds of breeding plumage here. And here's the pair. Great blue herons, the male is larger than the female. Those of you that are used to following hawks or eagles know that that's exactly the opposite of those raptors. So the male is here on the right, and this is the female. There's a difference in the bills, but it's a little hard to tell in this picture. So we'll move to one where it's a little easier for you to see. Here again, the opportunity to photograph them this close was priceless to me. This is the male, and you'll notice the bill is thinner, somewhat, but longer. This is the female. The bill is an extremely important part of the breeding and courtship of many wading birds, particularly great blues. They're the ones that I have studied. They touch each other with the bills. They grab a hold of each other's bills. And this is a lock that happens when the breeding starts to get, when the courtship starts to get serious. They will actually lock bills together like this, and they do a little back and forth. And of course, it's only appropriate that this all forms a nice little heart for what is about to happen. The invitation to mate is given by the male by putting his foot up on the back of the female. And when she is ready, she will not move. She will not move away. She will allow him to mate. And they did copulate, and they did. She did get on eggs, but unfortunately, I had to, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, I had to come back up north, and so I never got to see the babies on this nest. But if you're interested in what they look like and the life of them, then you can send me your email and I'll put you on my list. And come the end of March or the first part of February or first part of April, we'll follow the great blues here in the north. As I said, there are lots of other birds, some of which we're familiar. This is, we have green herons pretty much throughout the Northeast and throughout the South, and pretty much throughout all of the United States. They also nest there. I've never been able to find a nest of the green herons in there, but I'm looking forward to going back to Florida post-COVID. And now we're going to pivot, though. We're going to go from 6 Mile Cypress Slough over to Cape Coral. Now we're getting closer. You have a question?
Yeah, Rick, one of our listeners was wondering, what time of year do you find the barred owls down there?
Well, you find them all year round, but they in the breeding season, they the mating usually happens in February. The eggs are laid in late February. In the north, up here, where I am in New York State, that happens later. That happens in April. But we have barred owls in many places, probably where our listeners are. They will begin to talk in February. The barred owl has a distinctive call. He says, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" So when you hear that, you all, you're listening to a barred owl. We'll talk about the great horns in a minute. Off we go to Cape Coral. And what are we going to look for in Cape Coral? Scrub jays. Absolutely. A wonderful bird and an extremely gregarious bird, for those of you who've had anything to do with them. a little bit too gregarious if you happen to be having a picnic, probably. But it's very hard to find a scrub jay in Cape Coral that doesn't have all kinds of tags and markers on their legs, because it's a highly studied bird there. But we have a spot where we can go, and every once in a while we get to see one that is nice and free, like this or like this. They're absolutely gorgeous little bird. Will come and land on your head. Will gladly take seed out of your hand, which you're not supposed to have with you, but I defy you to go there without having some in your hand. It's a wonderful experience to get that close to these birds. But the bird that everyone goes to Cape Coral to see are the burrowing owls. They have a Burrowing Owl Festival there. They have embraced this bird, which means that all over Cape Coral, wherever burrows have been made, you will find them encased in white markers. And sometimes there's a little cross that's put by them there, and that's not to mark a death of an owl, but to give them a perch, so that they don't have to go far to perch. They're a very interesting bird, do all kinds of interesting things. My hope is that some year I can be there in April when the babies come out. I've never stayed that late, but some year. Well, they're called burrowing owls because they burrow. This was the female. She went down in there to do a little clearing out, little digging out. Now the question is, what does the poor guy do if he's going to keep one eye on the photographer and one eye on his wife? Well, this is how he does it. She burrows away, and he can close one eye and look at me with the other eye. You know, they are a magnificent looking bird. You know, they are just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful owl, you know. So we're now moving our way closer to the Sanibel Island area, and we're going to stop at Lakes Park. And should you ever be going down to Southwest Florida and you've never been there before, you can just email me and I can give you the list of these various bird spots for you to look at. And here in Lakes Park, right along the boardwalk in Lakes Park, which is a wonderful recreational facility, kind of a model recreational facility. It's huge. Lots of places you can rent a little paddle boat to go out on the water. You can rent little carts to drive around. You can do all kinds of things. Great paths for walking and biking, and it's a magnificent public park. Huge playgrounds for the kids, but also right alongside the boardwalk, busy place, right alongside where the refreshment stand is. Here's a little treat that's stuck its head out one day, and it's another one of those least bitterns hiding. You know, this bird was a bird that the birders from all over the area came to see. So you saw people standing on the boardwalk with their cameras, trying to wait for this little guy to stick his head out. It was wonderful. It's also a great place to see and photograph glossy ibis. This is a bird, you know, that's iridescent, so therefore its colors are reflected. And so if you see it alongside the road, it will appear to be a black bird. But when you get it in the right light, this is what happens, or this is what happens. It's pretty fantastic plumage. I would love to see what one of those feathers looks like that comes down through those multiple colors. It must be a magnificent thing. It's a very fascinating bird, the glossy ibis. This was a red-shouldered hawk, and as you can see, he has a red shoulder right here. This is the most common hawk. In fact, it's a very common hawk around the Southwest Florida area. But he looks a little different than the red-shouldered hawk that for those of you who live in the north. Up here, this face is much darker. It's a reddish brown face, but the Florida birds are much paler up here. But they still have that little red shouldering right there. Speaking of gallinules, this one is now called the common galinule. You might have grew up knowing it as the moorhen. But it's now back to being called a common galinule. And it is an absolutely beautiful bird. You don't see them closely very often to get a chance to see all this magnificent plumage stuff that's going on back here. This is obviously the characteristic identifier right here, that red plate. A couple of years ago, at Lakes Park, there was a nesting great white heron. This is the white version of the great blue heron. Pretty much a South Florida bird. You don't really see them anywhere else in Florida, and it's hard to see them up and down the coast very often. It was a bird that people were wondering a great deal about it, and whether it was a child out of the nest or if it was one of the parents. And I don't know whether the authorities ever really ascertained exactly what it was, but it did make it or another bird made some appearances to another site that we're going to go to in a little while and get back to that. Now we're going to travel from Lakes Park, for those of you that know where that is. And we're going to go up on McGregor Boulevard. McGregor Boulevard is the boulevard that runs from all the way downtown Fort Myers, all the way out to Sanibel. If you went along McGregor, there was one place where there was an eagle's nest. And for years, this eagle's nest, I would say I followed it for 5 or 6 years when the tree was alive. But the tree was damaged in a hurricane, not a hurricane that did the severe damage like Charlie, back in, not you, Charlie, but the Hurricane Charlie, back in 2006. But the tree eventually died, as you can see, but the parents stayed with the tree for one more year. This was 2 years ago. And they raised 3 healthy eaglets, as you can see. And the neat thing about this particular nest was it was enclosed in a chain link fence, high chain link fence. It was a piece of property that somebody owned, and it was fenced in, which was wonderful for the birds because people couldn't go in there and get terribly close to them. But it was also very satisfying for those of us who wanted to have some understanding of what these birds do when they fledge off the nest. For those of you that follow them know that once they fledge, usually they're gone. They will come back to the nest, of course, periodically, and they'll come back in the evenings for a while and they'll hang out for a while, but you don't get to see them doing what they're doing out there. But here, we could watch them. This, by the way, was the recalcitrant one. 2 of them came off the nest, and there was a log that was propped up out in this what became a playground for them, and we were able to watch the interactions of these young after they have fledged, which was something I'd never had a chance to do. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of contact between them. They did their things separately, but they also did a lot of things together. And this particular pair hung out a lot on that log. And I mentioned before that in eagles and many of the raptors, the female is the larger of the 2. So she's on the left here. This is a female and this is a male. And you can see there's a considerable size difference between these 2. So if you're looking at a pair of bald eagles that are nesting and they're together, you have a reasonable chance of sorting out who's who. Other than that, it's not easy. There are little differences in the bill, and you can see a little bit of that here. Might as well point it out. You notice her bill appears to be larger than his, appears to be thicker. His bill and the bill of males tends to be longer and thinner, and this seems always to be a thicker bill. Now, of course, that's relative. You know, you're comparing two things, and if there's only one of them there, it's not much of a comparison. So it also gave us a chance to see how the adults interact with the fledglings when they're off the nest. You know, our nest here in Bainbridge, when the fledglings leave, we know they go down to the river, and we know that, or we assume, the adults are helping to feed them. It takes quite a while before a young eagle knows how to hunt. He has an eye problem to start with. He doesn't have the capacity for refraction, which means that if he's hunting for fish, he doesn't see the fish refracted in the water the way the adults do for a little while. Takes them a while. Eagles, by the way, have a very interesting thing. I'll just pause for a minute and talk about this magnificent eye that they have. The eagle's eye, we don't know exactly how many times better than us it sees, but the classic line that I've heard about eagles in trying to describe their eyesight is, if you put an eagle on one goalpost and you put a newspaper under the other goalpost on a football field, the eagle could read the newspaper, assuming the eagle could read. But they also have a dual focus capability, which means that they can focus on something in front of them and something alongside them at the same time. And so if you ever think that the eagle is not watching you, forget it. If you're standing there and you can see the eagle can certainly see you, you know. So we're going to go down McGregor to John Morris, where I had the wonderful opportunity one year to listen to these guys in the evening and in the morning. And this is a pair of great horns, and they nested fairly close to where we were staying. This is the female, and you can see she's considerably larger than the male. You can also see the way the body just, they're both talking to each other. So she's actually communicating at this point. Interesting thing about the speech of these owls, the male's sound is lower than the female. So if you're hearing the two of them call together, and the lower pitch of the two will be the male, although he's a smaller bird, he has a larger voice box than she does. So that's a fascinating thing if you get to hear a pair together. And we did get to see the one baby that they had. Talk about, you know, fluff. This is the original fluff outfit here, you know. Quite a neat little bird this was. This is in the early morning light, so you're getting an interesting little color on her fleece outfit there, you know. And this was the female. My sister-in-law, Valerie, who recently passed away, unfortunately, taught me an awful lot about birds. And when she saw this picture, she said, you know, Rick, you can take pictures for the rest of your life and you're never going to get a better picture of a great horned owl than that one right there you just took, which I don't know whether she was telling me to stop trying or what. No, not Valerie. She would have said, keep trying. You know. So we're now getting closer. You have another question?
This is just sort of a general question, Rick. Could you talk just a little bit about your birding career? Like how long have you been birding? When did you start? And so on?
Well, I didn't have a birding mentor when I was young. I knew the birds were there, and I was aware that they were different. I was aware they made different sounds. Um, I got most. I think my interest got tweaked first of all by my sister-in-law Valerie. Who I met Valerie 57, 58 years ago. And that's only 2 years older, 2 years than I am now. Never mind. She taught me a great deal about birds, a tremendous amount. But I had a career as a musician and an educator. And so I really didn't do that much birding at all, quite frankly, until I taught out at Fredonia, out at the college out there. I befriended a man by the name of Alan Benton, who was the field biologist out there. And Alan and I worked on a little set of materials. My wife was teaching a 5th grade class at the time, and she needed some nature study materials. And so I said to this man, I just went over and introduced myself and was talking to him about it. And he said, well, I'll take care of the information part. You take care of the education part, and let's put something together. So we did. And of course, in the process, I learned about birds because Alan was a birder. And actually, he was an ornithologist who studied with Arthur Allen back at the beginnings of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which actually came full circle to me again last week when Nancy New, who I think may be a member of the Delaware Otsego group, I sent out a picture of the Peregrine Falls, and she sent out a picture of her uncle Arthur, who was A.A. Allen, who taught Alan Benton, who taught me. So there you go with one of your full circles again, or I don't know how many degrees of separation that is. But anyway, I was still doing a career and could only bird occasionally, but I got a lot more interested in doing it. And then finally, I said to Alan one day, I said, Alan, I'm a musician. I should know bird song. And he said, well, let's get started. And we went out on an abandoned railway. And he said to me, how many different birds do you hear singing? And I said, well, I kind of sorted them out in my mind. And I said, I think I said 7. I don't remember exactly. It's 7. Well, he said to me, there are 17 different birds singing right now. And I said, okay, let's get started, And in some ways, luckily, it was a time, back in the 1970s when if you wanted to find out what bird it was that was making the sound, you had to go find the bird. There were no tapes, no, it was old school stuff, but it was good. It was a nice way to learn. And then, of course, when I retired from teaching, I finished my teaching up at the college in Potsdam. And when I retired in 2000, then I could get serious, And so that's my family gave me a small, one of the early digital cameras. And that the rest is history. I just went from there, so you don't have to have started early in your life. I'm the perfect example of that. But I will tell you this, if you are an older person who can mentor any young people, please do it. Give them the head start. I have learned more from my grandson than from anybody else, because you get out there and he sees all kinds of things other than birds that are interesting to do. Okay, so we're gonna leave this little route here, and we're gonna go down on our way down to Bunch Beach, which is my favorite birding place in Florida. there's a ditch along the side, and when it gets water in it, the great egrets and other birds do quite a bit of feeding there. And one morning, I was watching this great egret, and this great egret got a little bit more than it bargained for when it got a hold of this snake. You can see that if there's such a thing as an expression on a bird's face, you know, the fear that is in this eye right now, and by the way, it has its nictating membrane, that extra membrane that birds have to pull across their eye for protection. Obviously, it's pulled that thing over there so you don't see that clear yellow eye, but there's a lot of fright in that eye right now, you know. Actually, it finally did do the snake in, but I just love that picture. That's just a neat picture. We're going to go to Bunch Beach and we're going to fly there with the brown pelicans because they are the pelican that dominates Bunch Beach. This is the bird that soars in the air and comes down head first into the water. A fun thing to watch. There's a little chorus of them that practices in the morning down there. So we'll run through some of my favorite birds from Bunch Beach. And we'll start with a couple of sandpipers. This is the least sandpiper. It's the smallest one that's there. And you'll see why. A lot of people refer to these as little brown birds. It's a little BB. They'll say it's an LBB, a little brown bird. I don't know what it is. It's just a little brown bird. But here's your sandpiper lesson. This is a least because he has yellow legs. This is a Western because he has black legs. Other than that, they look quite a bit alike, you know. And the other thing about being there in February and going into March, if you're there, is the plumage will start to change because the mating plumage looks different, the breeding plumage than this does. So that's always a little bit of a jolt to the people who are used to seeing this bird on Long Island, for example, when it's breeding. Sanderlings. Sanderlings are known as wave chasers. They're always in a little flock, and they follow the waves that, you know how waves surge on to the shore and then recoil. And then that recoil, they run out and get anything fresh that came in, and then they run back when the wave comes. But I couldn't resist this picture of a sanderling. Simply because it's a picture. It's not just a sanderling, you know. What about the plovers? This is the piping plover. Very, very popular bird to come see at Bunch Beach because this is not a common bird. And this is in breeding plumage, by the way. It's coming into breeding plumage because it has these dark elements. And this bill looks pretty intense in coloration. So this is the first plover, and this is the way most of the time you see these plovers. I mean, the piping plovers in particular. They're so well studied that they're banded, and then they have all these other bracelets on that identify who banded them and where they were banded. There's a gal named Megan Rauscher down there, and she can stand alongside you and tell you where that bird came from. This is a Nebraska bird, by the way, was banded in Nebraska. Also has a damaged right foot, so we always knew who this guy was. Semi-palmated plover, looking quite similar to this, but not exactly the same. This collar is going to come into the next bird too. This is a Wilson's plover. A lot of people go to Bunch Beach to see a Wilson's plover because you don't see them in a lot of other places in the area. That tends to be their beach. If they're going to be around, they're there. You'll notice the bill is considerably different. It's not that little tiny pointed bill. It's a much thicker bill. Pink legs. And here's a thicker billed one too. This is the Black-Bellied plover, although as you can see, it doesn't have a black belly at all at this time of year when it's in Florida, which is a little confusing when you're telling someone that's a black-bellied plover. But this is what it starts to look like in March. And soon it will have its entire breast will be black. Here, beautiful bird. And the black and white plumage intensifies on the right-hand side. Look, just a gorgeous little shorebird. This is a Dunlin. One of the problems with these pictures is there's no way to tell you about size. And I didn't want to labor this program by including all of the size comparisons, but it is difficult. This is a bird that's not much larger than a sanderling. It's not much larger than the sandpipers, but this particular picture happens to be closer. The ruddy turnstone. This bird, I think you'd have to call it a clam turner rather than a stone turner down in Florida. You see them doing more of that. Short-billed dowitcher, longer-legged bird, as you can see. There is a bird that's a long-billed dowitcher. It tends to be an inland bird and not seen at Bunch Beach. Then there are the terns. And again, there's no way I could include all the species that occur on Bunch Beach. So I'm just sort of giving you some of the interesting ones and the favorites. This is a Caspian tern. And we know it's a Caspian tern because he has a dark tip at the end of his bill. Another way to tell him his size, and here is the royal tern. This is the tern by which you can size all the other terns and compare them. And you see, obviously the bill is a different color. Got to be careful though. When this bird goes into breeding plumage, it gets very close to that color. So size matters, and having a little black tip on your bill matters. And the terns, and of course there are many other terns there as well, join in flocking with a bird that people love to go to Bunch Beach to see. Although I'll have to tell you, the last 2 years, the size of the skimmer flocks are much smaller at Bunch Beach, and I'm hoping that's not the effects of the red tide, but that red tide has taken its toll on the bird populations down there. There's no question about it. This is a little closer look, and if you looked closely in here, you'd see lots of I'm pointing to the screen. That doesn't do you any good, does it? If you look in here, you see lots of gulls and terns as well, laughing gulls and herring gulls. Very interesting bill on this bird. The lower mandible rides in the water when they swim. This is where they get their name skimmers, because they skim across the top of the water. Upper mandible is above the water, and when they hit a little fish, that closes and they've got a meal. And when you look at the bird from this view, it looks like he couldn't possibly hold up that bill. I mean, you'd say, you must have neck muscles. That bill is huge. But when you look at it from the side, you see that it's actually a very thin bill. So it's not quite, still pretty impressive, but doesn't look like something he'd have to drag along. Speaking of bills, you have a question, Charlie?
Yes, actually, we have a few of them, if I can ask. One person just recently asked, does the black-bellied plover grow new black feathers, or do the existing feathers change color?
That's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that question. Well, I can't say I don't really know. I don't know the answer to that question. As you know, in some cases, plumage exists underneath existing plumage, and sometimes it's replacement feathers. I don't really know which it is. I'll look it up. I'll see if I can find out.
Thank you.
You had another question?
Yes, when you were mentioning the red tide affecting possibly the terns, What about pesticides like on golf courses or mosquito spraying? Is that affecting the birds that you know of?
Oh, absolutely. Florida has a problem. I mean, they have a real problem. Um, the red tide has been, the whipping boy for the red tide is the sugar industry, and they're guilty. Don't misunderstand me. They're guilty of discharging chemicals into the Caloosahatchee River, which feeds into the bay. But that's not they're not the only people who are guilty. The chem lawn problem in Florida is huge. It feeds into every ditch. Every ditch feeds into a stream. Every stream, and so it goes. They have to figure out how to, and they're working on it. It's always interesting to read the newspaper when you're down there of the struggles that are going on. The first struggle was, of course, between the sugar industry and the tourist industry. One of the problems was the diversion of water that was flowing in to Corkscrew into the swamp area had been diverted into the sugarcane fields, and so they're beginning to deal with that. They're beginning to deal with ways to temper the effects of pesticides. It's more intense, let's face it, in Florida than it is in most of the places where the people who are watching tonight live. And I don't know what the solution is for Florida. I really don't. I do know that, when you have a fish kill like that, like they've had a couple of years, how can it not affect the wading birds? When we come to another section in the, I'll tell you about a man who's been doing some study with that, Okay, on we go.
Yes, there's actually one more question, but you might want to wait to answer this one. Our listener is wondering, what Southwest Florida bird do you get most excited to see? So you might want to wait. I don't know, but people want to know that answer.
It's coming up. It's coming up.
Okay, thanks.
And it's actually sitting on my head right now, but we'll get to that. This is an American oyster catcher, and that's what he does. He catches oysters. Although in Florida he does a lot of clam catching as well. I always say that this looks like a bird by committee, doesn't it? I mean, okay, I'll design the bill and the head. You design the legs and the feet, and you put it together, and this is what you get. It's a very stunning bird, of course, and when you get to see them, they're always a challenge to photograph. You normally have to go out into the mud flats when on low tide at Bunch Beach and hope for the best in terms of letting them get to you, letting you get to them, I mean. And this particular bird was very close to the shore one morning when I went down there. It was a foggy morning and there wasn't anybody else there, which is always interesting. And I wasn't even looking at this bird. I was looking at a Reddish Egret, who is one of my favorite Florida birds. And that bird was coming closer, and I thought, I'm going to get some good pictures of a Reddish Egret in the fog. And he walks right past this bird. And I said, oh my God, look at that. There's an oyster catcher standing right in front of me. And he didn't see me or care. I don't know what, And so as a result, you'll notice that the red is a little intense in these. That's because I had to lighten the picture in order. I had to figure out a way to get rid of the fog. It wasn't an intense fog in front of the picture, but I wanted to make it a little clearer. And you'll notice this guy is doing a little oyster catching right there, actually. Magnificent birds. They're just a lot of fun. And here he is. They have a way of going into a clamshell and disabling the the nerve that allows the clam to clam up, and then they put it down and open it up and eat it. One of my favorite things about Bunch Beach is being there in the morning, early morning. The lighting on the birds is always very interesting, and there aren't very many people there, if there's anybody there. And the birds, if you take your time and you know what their behaviors are, you can get fairly close to them. And this is one of the iconic Florida birds. This is a snowy egret. And remember, it's an egret because it has dark legs. It's also called golden slippers because of this. We're going to talk about those golden slippers in a little bit, though, because we're going to follow this bird through a little bit of metamorphosis to a breeding plumage. Just to give you a little idea of one of the fun things to study when you're there. When the breeding plumage starts, and you can see here we're getting quite a bit of growth on the back and on the head now. You'll also notice that the faceplate is going from yellow. It's turning a darker color. The feet are not as golden. And here you can see what happens to the faceplate. It gets this gorgeous rusty red color, and you don't normally see that in pictures of snowy egrets. And notice the legs becoming intensely black and the bill becoming intensely black. These legs in the non-breeding season have yellowish on the back of them as well. And when they get coming into the full breeding season, not only has the faceplate changed, but you can see the feet have darkened as well. And that's one of the interesting things, and I'll try to do that with a couple of other birds just to show you how the changes occur. Snowy egret's not that big a bird, but it can do a pretty good sized fish. Yes, this bird did get that fish down, much to my surprise, to be perfectly honest with you. This is the great. This is the great egret. And notice the faceplate here is now turned into breeding plumage, and that is a lime green, becomes even more intense than that. But look at the breeding plumes starting to come on this bird. This was almost the bird's downfall. For those of you that know about the plumage trade that was happening in the early 1900s, the snowy egret and the great egret are the birds that Teddy Roosevelt really initiated the whole protection of the birds to eliminate the plumage trade. We certainly have him to thank for initiating that process. This just gives you a little idea of how spectacular these birds are in the morning light. Boy, do I miss this. I was saying to my wife today that, well, I'm going to take my trip to Florida tonight too, just like everybody else is. This is tough times. Here's a size comparison for you between the snowy on the left and the great on the right. And you can see the great's really into breeding plumage here. And I asked them to pose for this. No, I didn't really, but I sent out a memo, and they met me there in the morning and lined right up for me. This is a snowy, this is a great, and this is a great blue. So it gives you some idea of the size difference in these birds. And that's one of, as I said, one of the problems of looking at these pictures is you can't stay with the differences in size, That early morning light, and this is a very early morning sunrise on Bunch Beach. This is a little blue heron. Now it's a heron again, remember those legs. It's a heron, but it doesn't look terribly blue right here until you get it when the sun comes up. Now it looks like a little blue heron. And not only is it a little blue heron, it's a little blue heron going into breeding plumage. This will become dark magenta, and the bill will become a much brighter blue as well. It's a gorgeous bird, fairly common bird. You see it a lot, but just gorgeous. One of my favorites is the tri-colored heron, or the Louisiana heron from the old bird books. Again, a heron has a very unique way of feeding, and we usually attribute this kind of feeding to the Reddish Egret, but actually the tricolored also feeds this way, and that is they spread their wings out and they create a shadow on the water, and the fish come into that shadow, and when they come into that shadow, wham, that's when they get them. They also do some running in the water, like the Reddish Egrets are known to do. That stirs up things, and then they hold out their wings. So they have very similar kinds of feeding. I have no idea who did it first, or whether they did it simultaneously, or whether one learned an adaptive behavior. I don't really know. Makes for some neat splash pictures, however, when they do their feeding. One of the neat things about Bunch Beach is the tidal pools that happen when the tide goes out. You get a lot of trapped fish, so it's literally like shooting fish in a barrel for these guys. They'll come in there, and makes for some nice picture taking too. These birds have to toss some of the things that they catch, and believe it or not, that is a fish. But the tremendous amount of work for very little protein. I mean, I can't believe that they don't expend more energy catching the fish than they get from the fish. But needless to say, they do it all day long. So maybe that makes the difference, Now we talked about the breeding plumage. This is one motley looking bird here. This is a tricolored heron. Pippy longstocking stuff here, pink legs. That third color of the tricolor is now intensified on the neck. Beautiful magenta overlay of feathers and a brilliant blue bill. I was there on into March a couple of years and was able to get some of these photos. Well, there are two favorite Florida birds. There are two birds that always get me excited when I see them in Florida, and this is one of them. This is a Reddish Egret. The Reddish Egrets are diminishing in their population in southern Florida. The other major population is in Texas. In southern Florida, they believe it's down to about 330 or so nesting pairs. They're a spectacular bird. Spectacular in the way they hunt. They run about in the water, and they throw their wings open, and they make sharp turns to the right and sharp turns to the left, and they're a lot of fun to watch. But they're also a lot of fun to watch go into the breeding season, and this is all going to change. This plate is going to become bright blue. This is going to become bright pink, and the legs even get a little blue. You see, the blue has started to come through the black here on the legs. This is one about to go on a run. Spreads its wings open, and away they go. And here is why I think this is such an exciting bird. This is the white morph of the Reddish Egret. It's the same bird as this, but it is a white morph, which is about 8% of the population. So if you take 8% of a reduced population, you're really in luck when you see a white morph. And this is the bird that I will literally chase up and down the beach. at Bunch Beach. And they will chase me or they will lead me on a chase. And you can see this bird is coming into breeding plumage. The pink and the blue faceplate is there. And here we go in breeding plumage, successfully catching a fish is a reddish egret. Blue here, bright pink here, intense black bill. And here it is in the white morph. And that, I think, is self-explanatory as to why I think this is one of the most beautiful birds in Florida. And I will chase a white morph anywhere one shows up. They're just a magnificent bird. This is not all fishing expeditions are successful. This I just put this in for the fun of it. This is a white morph coming into breeding plumage, as you can see. And it worked on this fish for about 10 minutes. It kept picking it up and it would try to eat it, try to get it in its mouth. It was having trouble. And finally it dropped it. Now, I haven't seen this very often with these fish, or with these birds. They'll normally stick to it until they can get that bird down, but not so. This guy threw it away. This is a young one. This is a young reddish egret. And obviously it doesn't look much like those other reddish egrets, but it is the same bird. And as you can see, it hunts the same way. Makes a quick stop to the right and does it. I showed this bird. We're going to look at more of these birds in a minute. I wanted to show you a close-up of the dark form of the reddish egret in full breeding plumage here. This magnificent, I mean, it almost looks like a lion's mane or something here, this plumage. It's just fantastic. Notice this is a transformer on his, I didn't turn my phone off. That's one thing. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in a minute. But I couldn't resist the bad hair day. The bad hair day of the reddish egret, which got me going on finding a couple of bad hair day pictures. So here's a bad hair day for a snowy egret. And here's a bad hair day for a great blue heron. I don't know whether this one is so bad. This looks pretty familiar, in terms of some recent hairdos I've seen, so like I said, it's hard for us humans to think we invent anything, but now I want to talk about those. You got a question?
Yes, some of our listeners are wondering a little bit about your photographic equipment and technique. Like, do you use a telephoto lens, and how far away are you usually from your subjects?
This is the camera that I use. It's a Canon SX70. It's a camera that's called a bridge camera. Every maker makes a bridge camera, Sony, Panasonic, any. The idea was to create a camera that you did have quite a bit of flexibility in using it, but it was a fixed lens camera, which means you don't own a series of lenses in a body like a single lens reflex camera. I highly recommend the SX70 for what I do. I have to be able to respond pretty quickly to stuff when I'm taking pictures. And this camera allows me to do that. It has a macro lens as well as a telephoto lens. The telephoto lens is dramatic on this camera. I mean, it's the equivalent of a 1200 millimeter lens, which would probably cost you $8,000 or $10,000 for a camera, for a single lens reflex Canon body. But with all things in photography, you have to decide what you want to do with the pictures. What if you're trying to create magazine cover material, then you might want to investigate high-end photography equipment. I don't do that. I don't enter photo contests and things like that. So I'm not, I can get some pretty good pictures. With the birds on places like Bunch Beach, because you study the behavior of the birds, and you know how they're going to act, you can figure out ways to get quite close to them. By quite close, I mean 30 feet, 40 feet, sometimes closer, sometimes even closer than that. So if you have a reasonable telephoto lens, you're going to get some good pictures. Photographing white birds in the sun is always a challenge, no matter what camera equipment you're using. I have nothing against, don't misunderstand me, single lens reflex calendars, or cameras, but I'm 80 years old, and the train has left the station in terms of me with that learning curve of really getting comfortable as I am with this camera, in how the camera is going to react in a certain situation. This is a camera I can keep on the seat alongside me in the car. And as long as I have some sensibility about presetting it for what I'm likely to see wherever I am, I can grab it and go. And that's it. I mean, proximity is great. The proximity is everything. Quite frankly, knowing the behavior of the birds is about as important as anything. And I'll just give you a simple example. If you're photographing a shorebird, for example, people will come down and they want to get closer to a shorebird. So what do? You try to get closer to the bird. What's the shorebird going to do? It's not going to let you get closer to it, But if you study the way the birds feed, how they feed, and the patterns that they're feeding, are they feeding to your left? Are they feeding to your right? If they're feeding to your left, then you make a big circle and you get yourself set into a position somewhere down on the edge of the shore, and you wait for them to come along. Things like that. I mean, that's a simple example, but it's true. You have to know, if you're photographing a pileated woodpecker, if he's really pounding at a pole looking for insects, you can get pretty close to him. If he's drilling a hole for a breeding plumage, he'll leave if you try to get close to him. So little things like that. So I don't know whether that answers the question or not, but that's.
Rick, may I interrupt?
Yeah.
I have a comment and a question. One of our attendees has proposed renaming the great blue heron the great bunting heron, because you love them so.
There are a lot of other bunting birds, so.
Well, that's true. That's true. And a quick question, another person wants to know if you'll be doing a zoom on the birds in your area up here, that because your photos are fabulous and you follow so many beautiful birds in upstate New York.
Sure. Right now, I'm working on a program called One Swamp, Many Stories, which is a program about a swamp that I monitor here, and many of you know it that get my posts. It's where the small Great Blue Rookery is that we all have followed for years now. And my point is that there's all different kinds of birding. It's wonderful to go to exotic places. It's wonderful to see the birds of exotic places, and we really get spoiled when we watch these programs on TV, of the people who have done this phenomenal photography and things that they've done. I mean, I have said to my grandson, who's a young man, get with it. You know, learn how to do these kinds of photography. It's too late for the old man, but you can do this. You know, you can do this. You can get in on this deal. It's fantastic, you know. But the other side of being outdoors is the incredible variety of things that you can find interesting. And I thank my grandson for turning me on to certain kinds of insects and things like that. And all of a sudden, something becomes something that gets you up in the morning and gets you out there and looking for things. You're not always looking for birds. You're not always looking for a new bird for a list. You're just looking, you know. And in the spirit of the quote that's attributed to John Burroughs, when he was asked, where should we go tomorrow to see something different? He said, the same place you went today. And I believe that. I believe I go to that swamp in the what shall we say, the season, at least an hour, and usually 2 and sometimes 2.5 hours a day. And the things that I've been able to see in this one simple 7-acre area is incredible. So when I get that program done, we'll do it. And I have others. I'm starting on one for birds at the feeder and things like that. But I love talking about great blue herons, and so I'll do my great blue heron program anytime you want me to. You know, but so on we go. Okay. I want to pay homage to a man named Ken Meyers, who runs the Avian Research and Conservation Institute out of the University of Florida. He's a man who has pioneered the tracking of birds. One of the mottos of that group is, we do the research and provide the data that allows conservation to happen. And it's true. They find out things that we need to know in order to be precise about what we can do to conserve certain species. One of the species they studied were the Reddish Egrets. And I mentioned, and you can see, let's see. I don't want to do that. Back up here, you can see the antenna. If you look closely, the antenna on and you can see it on the next one too. See the antenna? Now these were what we would today call kind of primitive transmitters. The stuff that they're coming up with nowadays is just phenomenal. They're also banded, as you can see, so that he can keep track. Sorry, that happens when I try to get my cursor too close to. Don't want to get to my favorite bird there. I don't know why I get that one out of there. He's tracked these birds. He lost 2 of them, by the way, to red tide last year. And you can go just the Avian Research and Conservation, ARCI. I think I have his T-shirt on, as a matter of fact. And you can go there and you see these wonderful tracking maps, the snail kites, these swallowtail kites, the birds that they've studied. And you can see where they go in the wintertime, how they come back and where they land and what they do. And all this important information that we need to know about these birds. So anyway, I just wanted to pay a little homage to Ken, because I think the work that he's doing is similar to the kinds of work that, quite frankly, the Delaware Otsego group does. I don't know why it does that. So let me just do this. Particularly with golden eagles, but with a lot of things. It's just a great group. But the research that they're doing with golden eagles is very similar to what Ken has done. You talk about a favorite bird. I guess this might be the favorite, and the second favorite would be the Reddish Egret. This is a marbled godwit. And I think it's one of my favorites because when we didn't see them much on Bunch Beach last year, and I'm a little worried about that, to be perfectly honest with you, because the flocks have always been there, as many as 20 in a flock. And the neat thing about Bunch Beach is that, again, if you study the birds and you're careful about how you interact with them, you can literally stand among them. And there's something extremely special about being that close to these birds. They will allow you to get down and get the kinds of photographs like this that I like to take of them, where you're actually, and sometimes I am, in the water, with the birds. Like in this picture, I was kneeling down in the water, or I might have been squatting down. Well, probably kneeling down now. No more squatting. But it's a godwit because the bill is an upturned bill. I'm not going to use that anymore because it's doing funny things. So let's just come back to this. I'm going to leave that out of there. The bill turns toward God, as Valerie taught me. It's an upturned bill, so you can always remember it's a godwit. We have a couple of different kinds of godwits. This is the marbled godwit. This was a bird we call Lucy because it's a leucistic bird. That's a bird that has some lighter plumage, not an albino. An albino is a different thing. Leucistic is when there's a lack of pigment in some of the feathering. Here's a bird that's like it, but obviously that's a very different bill and doesn't turn toward God, This is a curlew, long-billed curlew, as a matter of fact, which also will inhabit periodically Bunch Beach, not in the numbers, usually travels by itself, but will travel with the godwits. That's a pretty impressive bill for gathering things down in the mud, including a fiddler crab. Here's another long-billed bird getting a crab. And you might say to yourself, how do these birds get these crabs? Well, they have a little thing that nature's given them. And that is they have flexibility in the upper mandible of their bill. Rhinoplastis, I think it's called. Something like that. I probably didn't say that correctly, but the idea is they can drive that bill right down in the sand and then open it to catch something and bring it back. They have all kinds of sensors in the bill. I have to tell you, I waited quite a while for this picture. This was quite a while, but there again, I don't ever expect to get this one again of how to compare the two bills of these birds. The godwit on the left and the long-billed on the right. There's lots of other birds at Bunch Beach that I can't really spend a lot of time with. This is an eagle standing on a fish. Let me get fairly close because it really didn't want to take off at the time. This is the member of the cleanup crew that comes to the beach, takes care of anything that the eagles have left behind or the gulls have left behind. I want to tell you a quick story. I'm running a little bit long here. Give me a cutoff sign if I'm going too far. Most of the gulls at Bunch Beach are these gulls, and I mean, I'm sorry, pelicans. And most of the time they're harassed by the gulls. When they go down and get fish, the gulls come and peck at their at their pouch, trying to get it out. You know, the pelican who can hold more than his belly can, and all of that. This little gull, which is a Bonaparte's gull, has a different relationship. When that brown pelican plunges into the water, he stuns the fish. First of all, I think they're kind of cute together, to tell you the honest truth. They take off together, and the brown pelican will splash down in the water, and he stuns all the little fish in the area. This guy hovers and bingo, gets himself a little fish thanks to the brown pelican stirring up the waters. So it's a little bit of it's not a symbiotic relationship, but it's pretty nice for the little Bonaparte's gull, I'll tell you that. There are some oddities that happen at Bunch Beach periodically. These are avocets in their winter outfits. They're black and white outfits, not those beautiful bronze things in breeding. Once in a while at Bunch Beach, I've seen them, I think, 3 times there in the times that I've been there. But once in a while you see them. But the real outlander was this one about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, when an American flamingo arrived on Bunch Beach. There apparently are now wild colonies in Central Florida, small, starting of the pelicans. They're not the escaped birds out of the parks, but this bird looks in a totally wrong environment. You know, when you think of flamingos, you think of those pictures in crystal clear lakes with the calm water and the reflections and all of the birds strutting around. This guy looks like he's on the coast of Maine. It was just a very windy day that day down at Bunch Beach when I got these pictures of this bird. He was a star. He was a real star, this guy, you know. So we're going to go finally over onto Sanibel. And I'll try to go through this fairly quickly because of course, one of the nice things about doing these webinars is you can go to sleep if you want to. You know, you can go get a drink, you can go get some food. I can't hear the popcorn being chewed, so you're on your own here. This was one of those serendipitous moments. This is an eagle right at the beginning of when you cross the causeway on the Sanibel. There's a nest there. And this is the male. And he was out gathering, and I didn't know that. He turned around and he took a hold of this branch. And you wonder, how do they get the sticks they bring to the nest? And then he throws his weight forward and breaks off the stick to take it to the nest. Like I said, that little sequence, I don't expect to photograph that again in a while, but we're going to go over to Pond Apple Pond before we get out to the Ding Darling Sanctuary. We got a little bit to go here. This is a cormorant. It's a double-crested cormorant. It's a younger one, but he'll come into breeding plumage. But the fascinating thing is that aqua eye, that gorgeous. It looks like somebody sewed a button on his face. Wonderful bird to watch. Always a delight. Lots of course, great blues. I have to throw in a great blue periodically here. And then Hingas again. Pond Apple Pond is a little water purifying area. Has a nice little walk all the way around it. All kinds of birds in there, hidden away on Sanibel Island. Here's the female. Another one of those tri-colored herons. I wanted to show it to you because right alongside of it was one already in breeding plumage. Just happened to have the right colored water behind it too. Lots of wood storks there. Again, a wood stork working pretty hard for for a meal there. The wood storks are now nesting again in Corkscrew for the first time in, I think, 8 years. They did last year, which is nice. The water level was high enough. Amazing bird. This bird will even go so far as to start the breeding process, have the eggs on the nest, and if they cannot get enough food, they will stop. They simply will not, and a lot of times they won't even bother to build a nest. They have some sense about that. They also have a neat little attachment. If you check out that foot, they use that foot as a lure, a fishing lure. They'll put it down in the water and wiggle it, the way our golden slippers, snowy egrets will do, to attract the fish. Speaking of fishing with lures, I didn't get a picture of him doing it. These green herons will throw little things in the water for the fish to come up and take a look at. So they actually do fish with a lure. Remember that great white heron? This is that bird. I don't expect to get too many better pictures than that. It was a question about whether it was a male or a female. Well, when I saw it performing for a female dark form, I was pretty sure that this was a male. You should have seen his strutting stuff. He's going to fly us right over to Algiers Beach, where we find our snowy plover. This is the one they cordon off areas on the beach so that they can nest there. It's an endangered bird. A beautiful, beautiful little plover. Here are the Rolling Stones. I couldn't resist this quartet picture of turnstones. I mean, is that the Rolling Stones or what? Last year, 2 years ago, I got to stay longer into March, which means I was there for the swallowtail kite nesting. I have always wanted to photograph them. For such a huge bird to make such a tiny nest, when the two adults are on the nest, you can barely, there's no room for anybody else, but they're a magnificent bird. Again, a deceiving picture. The wingspread on this bird is the same as a well, let's see, it would be just about the same as a red-tailed hawk, so it's a much larger bird. Now we are on Sanibel at the Ding Darling Bird Sanctuary, our last stop. This is actually over on the Indigo Trail. We're not on the wildlife trail yet. And this is the iconic bird that everybody comes to see at the Ding Darling Sanctuary, the Rosier Spoonbills. And they are, the one in the back is a mature bird. It takes 3 years before they have that beautiful dark pink slash across their wings. And you'll notice the one in the front is a young bird, different colored bill, and no slash. Here he's showing you another aspect of maturity, and that's that rusty colored tail that they get when they reach maturation. And this is just because, I mean, these pictures of a great egret cleaning its plumage. Not only that, but it was framed. I just love natural framing, and this is just because. Over on the Wildlife Drive, one of the first birds you're likely to see in the first pond is a pied-billed grebe. They're there in the early mornings, and they're also there with the cormorants, who are incredible fisher birds. They really are. This is why it's called a double-crested cormorant. You can see one now in breeding plumage. He's got those two little tufts, his double crests, and one heck of a foot. to do some swimming with. Yellow legs, we do get our yellow legs here in New York. It's sometimes difficult to tell the difference between a greater and a lesser yellow legs, but here they are together. The lesser in the front having a shorter bill and not as big a bird, but of course that's relative. And the one in the back, the greater, with a bill that's longer than its head is wide. The mystery bird. When birders first come to Sanibel or South Florida and see a white bird that has heron legs, and you say, what is this? Well, it's an immature little blue heron, which is white. And you'll notice around the head, he's beginning to turn. You see a little bit of the blue plumage there, and maybe that's the answer. Maybe that plumage is actually there. You asked that question earlier, Charlie. I don't know. Every once in a while, you get lucky. Here's how you can compare a snowy egret in the front, to a immature little blue heron in the back. And of course, one of everybody's favorites along the wildlife trail are the green herons, who will come up on the edge and allow you to take pictures, along with the yellow-crowned night heron, here in breeding plumage, including his breeding plume. This one was very interested in bringing his catch up on shore to show it to everybody. Lots of osprey nests on Sanibel Island and within the park, the Ding Darling Sanctuary. This is a pair right along the edge. They were breeding, and he's coming in. This doesn't look terribly friendly to me, in terms of how he's approaching her. That's got to hurt, when he comes in. I mean, here it is. That's tough love right there. If he's going to land on her back, I'll tell you. One of the favorites along the roadsides, catching all the antholes, of course, are the great egrets there. Here's a little flock of red knots. We don't see too many red knots there. Unfortunately, we're seeing fewer red knots, period, in the United States. But they still do come through there. They don't look anything like they look in breeding plumage. One posing for you here to show you what a wintering red knot looks like. Another iconic bird that people come to the Ding Darling Bird Sanctuary to see in the second pond is the great white pelican. This bird, with a wingspread of about 108 inches, is the largest wingspread, that we have in our area. You can go to the California condor, which is about 12 feet, but this is a huge bird. Very difficult to understand how big this bird is unless it's by. Feeds entirely differently. Feeds like a flock like that. This was a very surprise visitor 4 years ago. This is a great white pelican. It's an African bird. And as you can see, pinkish with a very different bill and larger, believe it or not, than the American pelican, great white pelican. There he is, showing off that bill. So we're gonna end with that iconic bird from Ding Darling's Bird Sanctuary. This is the way they feed. They swirl that spoonbill in the water, and they close the bill, and they extrude all the water out the side. They have like little baleen bumps along their bill there, so they can squirt the water out and keep all the goodies. And here's a little bit of showing off the plumage. Again, we're getting into an adult here. And this is a bird in full adult breeding plumage. It's all there. The black on the head, the dark gray bill, the slash, and he is going to say goodbye to you. And I leave you at the Tower Pond on Ding Darling Bird Sanctuary as the sun is setting, with some of my favorite words from the poet Mary Oliver when she's talking about instructions for living a life. Pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. And I thank you very much for staying with me. Appreciate it. And I appreciate the questions and the interest. My thanks again to Susan, Becky, and Charlie for taking care of all that and the invitation to be a part of it. As I understand it from Susan, a recording of this, should you want to go back and study your Florida birds a little bit more in detail, or if you want to take a look at it, if you're lucky enough to make a trip down there, you want a primer, it will be on the website of the Delaware Otsego Audubon Society. And if you believe in groups that are working hard for the environment and for the preservation and the conservation of all of these wonderful creatures that you just saw, as well as all of the ones that are in your backyard, then you ought to go ahead and join the Delaware Otsego Audubon Society. Thank you very much.